Welcome, everybody. So good to be here together on a day like this. It's a day where many of us might arrive with a heavy heart, feeling that the world has become a little bit darker today. At least that's how I've been feeling today. So it's good to come together. This is one of our resources, and we're happy tonight, just to start with that, to be offering for you German translation with Melanie. Thank you so much, Melanie. And also Ukrainian translation with Hannah and Tatiana. Thank you so much for doing that. So we're inviting everyone, also our English participants, to click on the translation button, the little globe. And if you're English speaking, please just click on English. And this is just if one of our German or Ukrainian participants wants to speak to us, you will be able to receive the translation. One of the beautiful ways in which we are building coherence here in the call. And we are here tonight for an event, Understanding the Roots of Fragmentation. Possibilities for healing and flourishing amid adversity. And when I was just checking in with Christina Bethell, our wonderful presenter, we're so overjoyed to have her with us today. I love Christina, but we'll come to that in a moment. But we just felt like, wow, that is actually, the topic is so timely, flourishing amidst adversity. And yeah, maybe before we even go deeper into the topic, I just want to say briefly that Christina Bethell is a long-term friend of Thomas Hübel of the Pocket Project. She sits on our advisory board. We're very honored. And she's also a professor at the Johns Hopkins University. She's right now down the street from the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and her research, education, and service work focuses on building and translating the science of healthy development and the advancement of a new integrated science of thriving to promote early and lifelong health of children, youth, families, and communities. And it's this science, the new findings, which she is going to be sharing with us tonight. But we're also here to share how we are feeling today. And for that, I'd love you to just join me here, Christina. You're in the US right now. So yes, there you are.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Yes, I am.
Yeah, so how are you feeling today, having woken up to the news that Trump has won the election in an overwhelming way, it seems? And yeah, how
Yeah.
does it
Well, I
feel?
noticed when you asked me that, I get some tears in my eyes because the energy has been so not kind in the words and the threats and things that have come through for so many people. And I am sort of stunned and sad, and also regrouping around what life is up to, asking that question: what is the bigger field of life up to? We're having this call. What's the opportunity? But I notice my energy is much more here than here. So if it's okay with all of you, I'm going to just stay in this place of, uh, just really being stunned, but also as open to the possibilities as possible. So it's was truly surprising, really, like, sort of, whoa, what happened?
Mm. Yeah.
and worried, and also wanting to, figure out what the call is now. Now and now and now really is all life is. And so, but I'm here by myself. So I notice that I feel it would be very nice to be with. And so I'm very happy I'm here with all of you.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I do notice. So if I just start, I noticed this morning, I just literally tears were just coming down my face, but I wasn't aware of it even. Do you know what I mean? Like when the body just cries and the soul just cries.
Yeah, and as Thomas often say, it's, yeah, what is really surprising is that we don't allow more tears to
Yeah,
grieve what is happening on our planet and the amount of
yeah,
pain and suffering.
yeah,
Yeah, so maybe we can take a moment. I think wherever we are on this planet, I'm currently very closely related to the climate movements that are shaking from the news and fearful of what will happen at the UN climate conference as we also
right,
prepare for the climate consciousness summit of the Pocket Project. I know that this might have a huge effect on Ukraine and our friends and allies in Ukraine. And yeah, so it's a heavy heart that
yes,
is here. And yet when we're together, there is a, as you say, there is a place where we can sink into and allow the processing of what is happening to land more deeply in our bodies
right.
together. So maybe we just take a moment for
Mhm.
an attunement and to be together here in the
Yeah,
space.
that would be good.
So for that, I wonder, Ben, who's here as our tech host, it might be good to just go to the gallery view so that we're really together for
Mm,
this. Um,
beautiful.
and yeah, it would be lovely. Thank you for turning on your videos. It's lovely to see you.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's strange. Now that I see you all, I also feel like crying.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and let's just take a moment to maybe to see each other first. Many, many faces that I know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming together on a day like this. And let's just take a few deeper breaths. And then whenever you feel ready to relax your eyes more fully or allow your eyes to close, whatever feels most comfortable for you now.
Mm,
Yeah, and just allowing your body to be felt by your witnessing awareness. And as Thomas often says, each of our nervous systems has an aspect to it that links to the collective nervous system. Wherever we are on the world, we feel the effects of the events in the world, in our bodies, in our nervous systems. Yeah, maybe today we especially hold our US community, all of you who are here today joining us from the US. We hold you in our hearts, in our midst, so to say. Christina, we hold you in our midst. Yeah, and to be able to do that, we need to start with ourselves, just noticing, how am I here today? How is my body here? How much space is there in my witnessing space? How much flow is there in my body? Yeah, and where are the places where there might be distress, contraction, fear? Can I embrace those places in me? What are the other emotions that are up for me today? Taking a moment to feel our heart and possibly to open our heart or to open up to our own heart more fully. Yeah, we might notice also the parts in us that feel slightly overwhelmed with the news, that might be feeling a bit numb. Just to embrace those as well, making space for all that comes up in us. And just allowing ourselves to ground with whatever is present in whatever way we can. And then we might come back slowly to a place where we offer heart to each other, grounding to each other. And just notice very precisely what is possible for you today. Maybe you just completely need to stay with your attention, your care with yourself. Or maybe you're able to feel the group and return to this intention of offering space to all of you who are in the US right now, to Christina, supporting the space for grounding, being with each other, offering a heartful space of connectedness, belonging. Taking a few deeper breaths together as we sink more fully and deeply into our group space, our grounding, our heart space. Embracing our Ukrainian friends, especially here today. And inviting the higher light to stream in, praying for the highest good to stream in and touch each of us. To touch our agency, our capacity to be acupuncture points of spaciousness, healing in our environments. To make our contribution in the most beautiful way possible, wherever we are. Yeah, thank you. And
Thank you.
yeah, with that, I want to hand over to you, Christina, and I know that you're also going to be asking people to
Mm-hmm.
chat,
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah. So That was very beautiful. And boy, am I grateful to be here with all of you. It is a little odd that I'm here. That I'm even in this area. I was recruited here and I was like, "Well, I don't want to really come back there." And then when I did, that was the first time we had the president that we now are going to have. And I was like, it was all sort of how do we keep things alive and on the agenda that matter in the midst of, conversations that we're not necessarily open to that. And so here I am again. I'm like, wow, this is really so I do want to tune into that. And but I do feel the urge to flee Kosha that I could come stay with her for a while. So just acknowledging that that's all happening. But I do think that the conversation about understanding the roots of fragmentation, which are ancestral, but also very much about how we meet life now with each other, with ourselves, and the consciousness we can have to be conscious about that with skills offers tremendous possibilities for healing as well as flourishing, even when things are hard, which perhaps and arguably has been always the case throughout our human existence on this planet. Not always, as in every moment, but relatively speaking, it is normal to have adversity. And so, flourishing, what I call flourishing of the living and relating self, not necessarily always feeling happy or having everything you need, but staying in a empowered present relationship. What's hard is how I'm defining flourishing. And that's something we can learn. So I'm going to be going through some slides and a presentation. I'm going to be speaking as slow as I can, but I hadn't necessarily thought we would be translating. So what I want you to know about the slides is that you can look at them for more information. They're mostly there just to be visual cues for what I'm going to say. So I'm going to tell you with my words the main point, and don't worry too much about reading them, especially if it's not your first language or you're not comfortable with that. So it's really, I'm going to share them, and I've shared them with Kosha if you want to look at them more later. Okay. So my aim for my whole life has been to translate what now is a science, but as a child was more of a knowing of what it means to be well and develop well and to thrive. And for me, my work is very much about translating that into the frontline practice of healthcare, schools, communities, the day by day, and then of course policy, because in order to make that happen, we need to build capacity, make things important to do and required to do. So there's a lot of policy issues as well. And so I work on that edge between the science and the policy and the practice. But really, I came up in life as mostly just aware of all the possibilities and surprised at the gaps. And so I became a reluctant scientist, if you will. It was not my intention necessarily. So I really work to advance the science of human development and healing, which I think is based on self, family, and community led healing. And so that calls us to really do what we're doing here today and in the Pocket Project. And to do that in a way that's aware of the system, that the larger system, not just the system of life, obviously, but the larger system players, and to find a tolerance for that complexity and be aware of where we are in that system and move with intention in it. So we are in a system, but it still comes down to our own self, family, and community led healing ultimately. And I call this We Are the Medicine. So that's the name of my bigger platform is We Are the Medicine. So I wanted to just ask you in the chat to maybe reflect as well. I know we just had a reflection on these three questions, and you can just share a few words. Wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this, but the questions are what needs healing? Maybe we could just see some things float through as a group here. And then, and you could answer any of these, really all or any of them. What heals? And then for you in your daily life as a healer, because all of us are healers, whether we like it or not, or need to be, I think, what do you need to know, to develop, to have, to be a healer? Because healing is upon us. We don't have a choice but to enter into a mode of healing in the world we live in. So I'm assuming that there's some things being shared in the chat. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm not seeing it. That's okay though. I don't need to, but I guess I didn't open, I could open it.
You
Oh,
could
here.
open it.
Oh
Yeah, you
yeah, I didn't
can
realize
open
I
the
could open
chat.
it. Okay, so
Yeah,
great.
it's a bit much on the screen, but you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a little much on the screen, but I think it's really beautiful to just take a moment and acknowledge in your life personally or otherwise what needs healing, what heals, and what do you need. And I think that awareness for me always makes it clear to me that we know a lot. And so to acknowledge how much we know already and then think about what we can do. Okay, so with that reflection, I'm going to go ahead and move into some of the science pieces. And first of all, I do want to say that I didn't know, really hadn't put it together in my mind that this would be happening on the day after the election. So there's none of this that was planned with that in mind. But I do want to say that we are meeting the moment. There is a moment here upon us for us to meet. And the good news about that is that globally and in businesses and healthcare and education and in society at large, there is much more awareness and legitimizing of the need to recognize trauma and to move into a conscious relationship with its impacts, to recognize that and to heal. So this is just some pieces from the Harvard Business Review and Forbes showing that business leaders actually are really looking at this, which may be the group that you think might the least be likely to. So that's good news. But also governments. For example, there's many. There's even a paper here I'm going to be sharing with you that's about Ukraine and the efforts of the Ukrainian government to look at public health strategies to support healing as the trauma is still happening, to really be aware of that. So it's happening globally as well. And so these are some good news stories that we can look at. And in particular, understanding the relational roots of trauma. And I always say relational wounding requires relational healing. And so we are the medicine, right? If we have the opportunity to wake up to that. And I think that's really what we're all doing here. So we are the pioneers. I could say more about this slide than I'm going to because I want to move forward a little bit. But mostly what I'm going to say is that, when I was born in 1963, I'm getting old here, we didn't even believe yet in plate tectonics that could explain how we had continental shifts. People just knew that continental shifts had happened, but they didn't believe in the science of it because they couldn't imagine it. They didn't have a bigger view about how the sun and the moon and the water and the earth all related. And then also, only recently have we had any sense that non human things, nature, if you will, is interconnected in any kind of conscious way or seemingly conscious way. And we now know that trees and their roots, connect with each other in actually a nurturing, intentional way. They recognize each other and send out nutrients to each other and even to other life. So I think this is really a wonderful time to be alive, as difficult as it is as well. And finally, this last part of the slide is just recognizing that, again, when I was born, we believed in biological determinism. And that was really how people spoke. You get your genes, and that's just the way it is. And even though there was an understanding that sometimes those genes can be passed down, there wasn't a sense that there was anything we could do about it. But now what we know is it's the ecology, the environment that actually has the biggest impact on our biology. So when we look at this, what we call eco-biodevelopmental model, we're starting with the impact of our social environment, physical environment, and the intimate interconnectivity to our biology as a holistic developmental process that we can really do something about. So we wake up inside of this with so much agency. And the question is, can we take that agency and become skilled and effective and intentional in it? So I think it's an exciting time, but we are at the beginning of a paradigm shift. And like so many people who've come before us that sparked awakenings and maybe didn't live in this body to see them come to fruition, I'm wanting to offer to myself, certainly, and to others a sense of grace about that. I sometimes feel like, gee, it would be great to begin my career now, where we know so much more. Maybe we could start now. Yeah, so I offer that to you. And these next two slides are just something you can look at later, but we really have very strong science linking care and connection and this lived experience of being seen and cared about to our biological well-being early in life, certainly, but all throughout life. And the first study was the Harvard Mastery of Stress study, which was started in the 50s. And it was a study looking at a longitudinal study of young people who were at Harvard, just asking them about their lived experience as children in feeling cared about and loved, and then tracking them over time. And so it's randomized, so it's a study like that, finding that those that really had more care, less of an experience of being cared about and connected, and their lived experience sense of that, were, 85% of them had some kind of pretty serious health issue when they did the follow up 35 years later, compared to about 25% of those who had experiences of strong love and care from both their parents. So, this is obviously a big statement, but the science has come to prove so much the power and importance of what we call safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. And it's definitely the center of the American Academy of Pediatrics and in many places around the globe. There's something called the Nurturing Care Framework, which is a global framework, really recognizing this core science of relational health. And so that's really what all of our science has been building toward. But we had to do some basic science with brain development and study it so that we could explain the mechanisms of effect. Like, how is that? We can observe it, but what makes it make sense scientifically? And so that's happened too. So there's a whole neurodevelopmental brain science that explains how all this happens as well. So these slides are just sort of mapping a little bit of the high points of that science. And only recently, really just a couple years ago, we actually took it further to really document that maternal stress in the womb does affect the brain of a baby. That doesn't mean we can't do something about those effects if they're negative, but the importance of understanding how to stay regulated emotionally and physically is important to even the development of a baby. So, some of these things are examples of even recent developments that are giving us more of a bold opportunity to translate this into the science of healthy development and human health. And in particular, at the core of some of the early childhood development literature is this concept of biobehavioral synchrony. Now, for any of you who work with Thomas, and when I started working with Thomas, he was teaching us how to have biobehavioral synchrony with ourselves and with each other in our triads. So I was very excited that, he was doing that and this was my work. And, so it's wonderful that we don't necessarily have to study all this the way it's been studied to know it's true, but it's helpful. And you can see, I think, in Thomas's work, bringing the science in is helpful. So we know that my brain and your brain, my limbic system, which sort of regulates the emotional system, and yours are attuning to each other. And when we do that consciously, and really we can have a felt sense of attunement to a child, they start to have healthy brain development and feel and build that into their own way of being so they can do that too when they get older. And yet, so many of us didn't have that because we didn't know about this. Now, we do know a lot about healthy attachment, but the good news is we can start now. We can repair attachment wounds where we didn't have that biobehavioral synchrony that really explains why healthy attachment is so important. So, I wanted to make sure you knew some of this science. And it comes down to a very empowering statement, which this is a quote I like, which says, "The success of the intervention depends upon the interior condition of the interveners." And so, again, bringing it back to, this is a little, it was a freeway sign, actually, the picture on the left. I took this picture while I was driving in my car, and I saw this freeway sign on the roadway. Everything you do, you say and do creates an impact. And so every interaction creates a reaction in ourselves and in each other. So this is, I think, very exciting and also points back to the core skills that we're both learning and trying to offer in much of the work of the Pocket Project, from my understanding. So memory is stored in the body is the next big piece. And this is where I think this morning when I woke up and my body just started crying, my soul just started crying. It didn't have anything to do with my mind. My mind couldn't process really what had happened, but it's the way it goes. And so when we do our healing work, we do find that if things have not been integrated as they occurred, then we need to go and unpack that, and then they can come out and we can have lived experiences in our moments now that can actually be, as Thomas called, echoes of what we lived before, but either couldn't feel or, because there's only so much you can feel consciously as a baby or a young person, but we do have to do that work. And so that's the opportunity we all have and we're doing all the time. So there's fields now. For example, there's the field of psychoneuroendocrinology. And so it affects our psychology, our immune system, our hormonal system, are all caught up in how we have been impacted by our experiences, our lived experiences. And so the lived part is really important. So we have adversities, let's say in early life, that in many ways are the roots of our fragmentation, but it goes back generationally, obviously. And then we have protective factors as well. So that we start to enrich this story with, well, not everyone that has trauma has the same outcome. And that's a really big finding. We have huge variation in how people exposed to all kinds of traumas, whether it's direct abuse from your family or experiences of war, any trauma, the impact of that trauma and how it affects our brain and our body and our immune system, and whether it leads to something called toxic stress, which then becomes like a state we can get locked up into that keeps all of these neuroendocrine immune uh, processes moving in a bad way, are protective, what we call protective factors. So we have a lot of agency around what we're going to call protective factors. And I'm going to talk about that in the second half of my talk. But I'm going pretty slowly, and I think I have plenty of time still, right? I have till top of the hour. So let me see if I can move forward and get to that. But I do want to make sure first that you see a couple more things if this is new to you. And I don't know how new this is to you, but for those of you in certain groups, you may need to call upon certain kinds of science to get attention from people. Other people might not need that. But this is an example of a brain picture of a child that had maltreatment and then did not have maltreatment. And so it very much prunes the brain to have trauma, to get stuck in trauma. And so this is the deep science that you can learn more about if it's useful to you, but I wanted to make sure I pointed it out. So, one of the ways in public health, which is a field that I'm in, of translating this science into the things that we do in our society, in our schools, in our healthcare system, how do we move this out of just science into the world? And so we measure things, we have to measure things, usually in a way that isn't requiring brain scans. So there's a measure called the Adverse Childhood Experiences measure that is based on a study that was done a long time ago now, but by the CDC, which is a big public health leader here in in the country, and it's all over the globe now. But just noticing that a lot of differences in health were being predicted by experiences of abuse, neglect, or other kinds of dysfunctions that occur in households that really have a direct impact on the safety, stability, and nurturance in the home. And so there's something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, and it's used to kind of give a flag for how much trauma burden might we be carrying. And then, of course, not everybody with these experiences have negative outcomes, and we're going to talk about that, but many of them do. So we're carrying a big load. Here's a little bit of a picture of what it looks like globally. The World Health Organization has measured ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, across the globe, and the lowest rates are in Sweden, and the highest rates are in South Africa and Saudi Arabia and other countries like that. So, there's a lot to say about this, and there's a report, and I'm on the slides, I'm giving you links so you can see it. But I know many people here are not just in America, but it's about almost 2/3 of American adults carrying any ACEs. And when you have four or more, the probability of having illnesses that are serious illnesses is much higher. And it's a dose response effect. So it's not necessarily the thing that happened, it's the effect it had on you. And so, for people experiencing war right now, for example, or trauma in the home, or lots of um, abuse or emotional abuse or alcoholism or some of those things. It's not necessarily the thing necessarily. It's more how much it happened and whether we were able to integrate it as it happened with protective factors. But it's a dose response so that all of these things on this slide that you can look at later if you want to, but everything from smoking and drinking to heart disease to, of course, mental health problems, but liver disease, cancer, all sorts of things are very related and have been scientifically shown to be related to having exposure as a child to adverse childhood experiences. And this is very much now in the scientific community in just about all countries. So wherever you are. So in the symptoms that we give labels to, so when you have trauma, we give a label to it. We say, oh, you have depression, or you have anxiety, or you have this or that. But basically what it is getting, not being able to maintain regulation. So things happen. And then can we stay in a regulated state where we have the feeling, but we come back into regulation? And so this is fundamental. And a lot of the mindfulness practices are intending to build that skill, the skill, and it's a practice that we can learn. And without that, often we can get stuck on, which would be like anxiety or hyperactivity, or get stuck on off, like depression. But it's very much about how the brain is functioning. And so when we can be aware of what we're feeling and use skills to stay regulated, which very much also have to do with staying connected to each other, because that is one of the most regulating forces is relationship, healthy relationship and care.
Christine?
So, yeah. So I wanted to make sure that you had a really clear sense of what it might look like if a person is experiencing what we call toxic stress. And that is what can arise out of exposure to traumatic experiences like adverse childhood experiences. And so even ourselves, and I notice some of this in myself at times, so it's definitely a moving target, but being able to inhibit responses. So if we feel angry, we don't necessarily speak in an angry way. That would be a response inhibition. Noticing I'm angry, but not acting out. Working memory, being able to remember why I walked into the other room. Also time management and all of these qualities. So pretty much all the main basic executive functions of daily life are impacted by toxic stress. So it's important, but you can see it in how we live and move every day. But again, it's very important to separate out the events. We're having an event right now from the experience of that event, being aware of what I'm feeling, to the effect that it has. And in between the event and the experience can be protective factors or awareness or the opportunity to heal as we're experiencing difficulties, healing on the fly, if you will, healing as we go. And between experience and effects also are those protective factors and skills. So relationships, skill building, and so on are very important to understanding whether we end up with or live in a traumatized state. So, this is a pyramid that's commonly seen. And if you haven't seen it, it's called the ACEs pyramid. It just explains how we go from those experiences early in life. What's the logic model? What's the logic of how it leads to early death? And for me, I want us to get off the pyramid and into the solutions. And a lot of that has to do with learning the skills and shifting our environment and our policies in a way that really understands the science. And that's what is starting to happen in our society in a much more profound way than I thought would happen, even early in my career in life. So we have a long way to go, but it also has moved. So part of this are strategies for healing. And there's a whole science out there, like thousands and thousands of papers and studies that I put into three buckets. And they have to do with time in practices, which we do meditation and self reflection, sensing and feeling the body and the thoughts and the emotions, allowing them to be from that place of awareness, that kind of thing. Time with practices where we really intentionally attune and connect, and also time for practices where we give whatever is ours to give, where we tap into that powerful longing to love and to give. And so there's a lot of science on these practices. And all of these are things that I see being so deeply rooted in all of Thomas's teachings and in the Pocket Project work that you do. So we want to pivot, though, from trauma now to talking about the opportunity to heal. And I've been talking about it a little, but this is a big focus now in America and more across the world. I created something called the Positive Childhood Experiences Measure to not the adverse childhood experiences, but the positive childhood experiences measure as a way to start to understand the power of healthy love and relationships and nurturance in the midst of adversity. Is it actually what's explaining a lot of the variation in whether people get sick or not, for example? And so we've done some studies, and I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. But first, I want to give credit where credit is due. Anne Maston has been a pioneer in the science of resilience that does again confirm that what I said at the very beginning, that relational wounding requires relational healing. And there's a paradox in that I'm going to talk about in just a bit, which is what I call the positivity paradox, that relating about what's hard actually is very healing. And so some people think if I look at what's hard, it's going to hurt me, but it's actually what heals us. And all of you probably know that, but a lot of people don't. So her book, Ordinary Magic, which I love if you want to take a deeper dive, looks at 3 layers of relationship building, healthy, nurturing relationships, building skills of children and skills in ourselves, but making sure to bring it out into the community setting, organizations, and the environment. And that's a lot of what my work and maybe your work is. So, this positive childhood experiences study, which was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, it shocked me that they took it, was really looking at whether positive early relational experiences were explaining differences in mental health of adults as they of adults, let's say. And these experiences are things like feeling, lived experience, felt in your body, memories. Did I feel I could talk about my feelings? Did I feel safe to talk about my feelings when I was a child? Did I feel my family stood by me in difficult times? Did I feel I was in part of a community where we did things together and I felt happy about that? I had traditions that I was a part of, feeling a sense of belonging in high school. So these are things that we happened upon that really were lived experience memories in your body about what happened when you were a child. So adults reporting this who had all sorts of adverse childhood experiences were 72% less likely to have depression as an adult. And the research is much more extensive on a lot of other health issues. But the bottom line is it got the attention of the community, public health community in America and now across the globe, because these are things we can do something about. Everyone has a superpower to promote positive childhood experiences. Even if we can't go into the home of a child, we can be that force in the community, and it makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So, again, we have some research that really is empowering, but again, it comes down to making sure that children, that ourselves, are having a lived experience of feeling safe. It's not enough to think you should feel safe. You have to actually experience it in your body. And so, this is why it's so important to develop that attunement skill where we can sense, is the other safe or not safe? Can I meet them there, wherever they are? Because then that's safe. And I notice Thomas does this a lot in his sessions with people online of slowing it down to where he meets the energy where it is, to stay connected, because it's the connection that you want to maintain. And that's really a distinct concept that's just starting to bubble up to the surface in a more public way as a public health skill, let's say. So I'm going to make one point here. I mentioned it earlier about the positivity paradox. For those of you who like research and want the studies, I have a few things on this slide, but don't worry too much about it. Basically, I have 2 points to make. One is the importance of avoiding toxic positivity. In other words, the positive childhood experiences is not about being positive all the time. It's actually about being present in the difficulties. That is the positive. So the paradox is that the most positive experiences that we remember in our lives are often how we were met when things were really hard. So we could be creating one of those here today, even for me, that it's a difficult day for me for sure, but I'm here with you and we're connecting. And so maybe I would look back on my life and say, wow, that was a really positive experience, even though it was difficult. So we're not talking about toxic positivity. In fact, we're talking about the opposite. And the studies are really clear that by having a habit of noticing and accepting difficult emotions, we reduce negative psychological problems. And by doing that, we don't reduce positive psychological experiences. So the opposite is happening of what a lot of people walking around think, that if you just don't address it, it won't affect you. There's no way out of becoming awake. So I want to start to end a little bit by talking about the flourishing paradigm. And this is taking this just to another level, which is owning and taking responsibility for our own flourishing and having that radical resilience that we need is, I think, something that's very important. And that the absence of illness does not give us flourishing. And so the idea of setting as our bar for our lives and for our health of our society, positive health, flourishing, is really important because there are many people who have lots of diseases, but they're flourishing. And there are many, many people who have no diseases who are not flourishing. So to call out flourishing as a concept that we really want to promote positive well-being. And to do that, we can do that even when we're having difficulties. So these are some of the qualities of flourishing that are measured. We can measure flourishing, and we do. Only about 2 in 5 United States children meet flourishing criteria because we measure it for children as well in a different way than adults. But so I just want to have you look at these a little bit. So, first is having a sense of meaning and purpose, feeling engaged in life, being willing to engage in life, valuing and creating positive relationships is the next criteria. Having a positive orientation to life, not that you ignore what's hard, but you look consciously for what can I learn? Where is there possibility? Where is there hope? What's the meaning I can make out of this? And that sort of thing as a habit. Also, seeking to contribute to knowing our innate value and the importance of every moment of relating, that it affects other people. We are affecting other people by how we are, and to even value that and therefore work to be connected to ourselves so we can be more connected to others is a contribution. And so seeking to contribute that time for is very, very much a part of flourishing. And then all of this, of course, often requires a sense of our inherent worth, not because I'm giving to you and you are finding me useful, but because I exist. So these are things we measure in our research and look at in its importance to health. So people, adults who do not have these qualities, um, in a longitudinal study, for example, even with many illnesses, adults that had these qualities could have these qualities, even with illness is possible. And when they did, they were, those who didn't have these qualities were 65% more likely to die over a 10-year period, for example. So it's very important that we stay at the watch of creating our own flourishing, to commit to it, especially during adversity, and to know that it's possible even when we're having a hard time, because that positivity paradox tells us that we can, through connection about what is hard, create a lot of positive qualities in our bodies and that neuroendocrine immune system. And to me, that's a superpower. So the bottom line is there's a lot going on. These are just some slides of examples of community-based groups that are embracing. This is a group I work with in Baltimore, Maryland, and they're looking at what they call existential determinants of health. So meaning, connecting to each other, our belonging as being core determinants of health that we can foster. Also in the global health community, the environmental and climate crisis community, I've been working with Karen O'Brien, who many of you may know about. She's worked with Thomas as well on applying quantum physics to this whole business of waking up inside of our adversity to be the people who can, we matter more than we think, is her book. You matter more than you think. And how can we leverage our capacity to flourish as a way to be carrying forward in a positive way amidst the adversity? So I'm going to go ahead and start to close without saying more about what I just went through. Sorry, I just went through a couple of slides quickly, but mostly to say wherever you are, there are resources. So if you happen to work in organizations or public health, there are a lot of resources. This is just an example of a resource from an organization that I helped lead called the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. That's the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. So there are a lot of toolkits you can get. They're free on thinking about what is trauma, how do I start this conversation wherever I am. All of them sort of share a lot of things in common that also reflect very much the concepts and skills that are a part of Thomas's teaching and the Pocket Project. And mostly it's, again, just looking at there's these principles of what do we need to do? We have to understand this, recognize trauma when it's in front of us, respond, how do we respond, and so on and so forth. So these next couple of slides are mostly resource slides for you if you want to get access to these trauma-informed, trauma healing resources. There are a lot of key principles, but it starts with safety. And safety doesn't mean not having difficult feelings at all. It means being met in a safe way with whatever is arising. And so this is really a key skill set that many people who train to facilitate are developing. My sense is these are all principles that many of you are aware of. But for me, I think we have to take it so seriously because often we think, because we know it in our minds, that it's happening. And so I want to make sure you know there's a lot of resources here. And I had posed some questions in this slide for questions you could ask yourself about whatever community you work with. Like, how do they define safety? Very important to continuously reframe our work as facilitators of healing trauma and promoting flourishing with whoever we're working with by asking questions. You know, because people can tell you what is safety for me, and to meet people wherever they are is the key, because then you can go forward from there. And so taking the time in every new group that we want to work on a process with by asking, what does safety mean to you? What's needed to create that, and allowing our toolkit and all of our tools and skills to come to bear inside of the truth of what each group needs. So I am going to end pretty much right there, maybe 30 seconds more. I believe we need to operationalize love to make love a living thing. And that in that, the inner work that we're doing here is what the external will make the external work helpful. And the last slide is for those of you on the global scene, there's something called the inner development goals that are actually embraced quite internationally now as the fundamental skills that are needed to help us transform climate crisis, racism, poverty, things like that. So in order to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, everyone is now saying we need to focus on the inner development goals. And that is again pointing back to what I think you're doing in the Pocket Project of creating the capacity for being, having a relationship with ourselves, being able to then regulate and solve problems together. And there's these 23 qualities that you will recognize, also very connected to flourishing. And so for me, this is hopeful. These conversations are happening. my prayer is that they continue to happen and take over like a choir, and that we are not going to be taken down by what also happens when we address trauma is the unhealed parts come. And perhaps that's what's happening in a very protracted way in America. I'm not sure, but it looks like we're seeing things come to the surface. But we, in this, need to keep coming back to um, continuing to evolve ourselves and develop these qualities. So I'm going to just end with a quote um, that in times of the crisis of the spirit, we are aware of all our need for each other, and our need for ourselves. And so I'm going to end with that.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. It's a download of inspiration. I think for many of us who have been and are deeply involved in this field, it's just such a gift of resources and background material, the right scientific studies to quote. So helpful, and I can speak for myself. Um, for instance, in the work that we have been doing through the Ukrainian Trauma
Yeah.
Relief Project, we're just now coming to that place where we're saying, okay, what we want to focus rather than, you know, meeting the trauma, offering one-on-one sessions. We would like to empower people to start resilience circles, circles for flourishing amidst adversity. And there's so many tools here that are really practical, just helping us with our next steps. So, and I'm
And it's
sure,
even just if I can just, sorry, I just got excited about something you
yeah.
said because I went over this slide, but there's an exercise that I often do called finding the jewel. And it's really where you recognize the pain and then you just take a moment before you go to it to think about what is it that is good and right and true that I love that is making this painful.
Hmm.
And to just remember that every pain is because we know that peace is possible. Connection. We want connection. We want peace. We want justice.
Hmm.
And when that doesn't happen, then we have pain, right? And so just taking a second to remember that and then taking that awareness and then bringing that to the right need to express the pain, but without forgetting that at the core of every pain is still the wisdom of what is life giving.
That's beautiful. And I know that we're currently at a place where we're very keen also to bring more skills training around grief work
Right.
to the Pocket Project because it's so needed. And Martin Prechtel, who I had the joy of interviewing for the Global Healing Conference, I'm still, um, he said so beautifully that the depth of our grief is the direct reflection of the depth of our love, which is just the other way around of what you were
Yeah.
just very,
That's
very.
exactly right. And to remember that gives us the courage, I think, to feel it. But if we cut off from our love because we don't want to feel the grief, and they're connected, in other words, these two things very much.
Yeah, and I think, something else that touches me so deeply from your presentation, I'm sure all of us, is the how we can offer the space to each other to thrive within adversity, and that by really being there, relating in meaningful ways, offering shared presence to what is happening, how much space we can create for healing within adversity, and that this is what we need. And that, yeah, I guess maybe I'll start just with one question to you here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Because I often see that people who have experienced true adversity through post-traumatic growth come out with an added layer of wisdom. It feels like they grow a step further and deeper. So, I just wonder what your thoughts are on post-traumatic growth and
Mhm.
the possibility to actually be
Yeah.
empowered by going through
Hmm.
traumatic experiences.
Yeah. Some of you know I write poetry, or it writes me. And there's one poem called Breaking Ground, and it's actually has a lot to do with what came upon me around some of the wars going on in the world and the experiences of children. And there's one little line in it that where I talk about the cruel and unfair truth of love, even if it was never shown, even if you didn't see it on the outside, it's still true. And it goes on. It's a long poem, so I won't burden you with it. But it's really
Mm,
true. It seems unfair almost that you can have such horrific trauma and actually happen upon love and growth the way that you're talking about it. We had a board meeting of that campaign for trauma informed policy and practice recently, and the leader, Sandra Bloom, who leads something called Creating Presence. You all need to know about her. And we were talking about, is there any real healing? And she said no. She said there's only post traumatic growth. There's only growth.
right.
It's only growth. And so flourishing is very much about that rose that comes through the concrete and that we seek it. And there's a lot of biological evidence that life is always seeking to move, but we don't it's not like there's some original state that we go back to, because a lot of healing is like got to go back to this original wholeness where you all are already whole. That is true, but we're also constantly evolving. And so post-traumatic growth is absolutely possible. In fact, the Harvard Business Review did a study of leaders, and pretty much all of the leaders that were known not just for what they created, but for the way they created it, that they were good leaders, actually, not just creators of money or whatever. And it was trauma, that they've had something difficult that they met through, and grew through. So that's
Mm,
the possibility, but that doesn't mean that we don't, alongside of the flourishing, suffer. And that's really the point, is that um, people suffer and they flourish. Some
right.
people don't suffer and flourish, but many, many people suffer and flourish.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. And maybe we can even just have a moment to allow that to sink in, because there's many of us who might wake up, when we really become intimate and we share each other our deepest, darkest
Yeah.
fears, pains, and suffering. Some of us wake up at night and have deep physical pain or deep emotional pain. Some of us are in a war and are suffering deeply with anxiety. But we suffer in different way, but that we really honor this, that many of us suffer and thrive in our lives.
It doesn't make the trauma, the abuse okay. That's another piece. I think we need to fight for prevention, and that's the responsibility we have in societies. Um, so I just want to say that because
Right.
we, but that's the dance, that's the complexity that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And we're built for it. Apparently, we're designed to do this because we're doing it.
As we're sitting here now, Christina, I feel like I don't want to let you go, and I think I'll need to invite you for an interview soon,
Mhm.
just to have a
Yeah,
conversation with you about this.
yeah.
I notice that I'm really loving having a
Mhm.
conversation with you about this, but I also would love to give space to others who are
Absolutely.
here and would love to bring a question to you or just share a
Mhm.
comment, anything that touched you. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just also really appreciating like Ben and others, Mona, just sharing the links in the chat as we go. Thank you.
You for that.
Really appreciating that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, anybody who would like to raise your hand or Herbert, hello. Yeah, and we're grateful if you can bring question or insight in an essential way over to you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Christina, for the presentation. This is all very important and wonderful work. And I've seen it in my own development with personal trauma, but I'm also learning so much those dimensions of ancestral and collective trauma.
Yeah.
And that what I'm now starting, and this is a bit related to Kosha's question, would I have started to do this ancestral work with my family without this great challenge? And so the question is there some wisdom in the challenge? We like to pathologize things so quickly. Gabor Mate tells us about how important it is to see the disease state in with some
Yeah.
different eyes. So I just
No.
wanted to see whether there are, I wish we would be in a world like this, but I wonder sometimes whether we have other roles to play in working out generational long trauma. And it may have to do with going through pain and not avoiding it.
Well, I mean, the one of the studies I shared with you is when we don't have a habit of recognizing what's really true, that's hard, it actually leads to mental illness. And when we do recognize what's true and what's in us, it actually doesn't diminish our positive experience, but it does reduce negative mental health problems and physical health problems. So it's a paradox that you don't think of. And so I absolutely think that's true. So then it is what's true and what can we be aware of, not just in our mind, but in our embodied self. And I think that's where a lot of the trauma we hold comes when we quiet into ourselves. It can show itself. So that attunement, and then not being afraid if you happen upon that ancestral trauma energy and lineage without having it shut you down with either fear of feeling it or shame that it's there, because a lot of people we work so hard to heal ourselves. It's disappointing to be so healed that now you get the opportunity to really go for the hard stuff, right? Now the ancestral healing is something you, Herbert, can take on because you're at a place of awareness and capacity to do it as an offering of your love. I really absolutely think that's how it works.
It did require some waking up, though. And
Yes.
I would like to believe that this waking up happens when everything is nicely regulated in your stress state. But I wonder whether that actually happens. And
Yeah,
whether what Osha says that you need to go through,
yeah,
Buddha probably also didn't wake up because everything was happy-go-lucky.
absolutely. No, and that is our work,
That's wisdom,
the
huh?
feeling. Hmm. Yeah,
So
we have to
anyway,
feel it.
wanted
We
to
have
make
to meet what's in us. And when I say that, I mean emotionally feel it, not just in our brain. Like, looking back, I had these things and I understand but really the embodied feelings. So I do think that's there, but to not label it as I did something wrong or I failed or I've got to get rid of it, rather let it be a teacher. And no, we're built for life. We're built to feel a lot. We can feel a lot.
Hmm.
And sometimes joy in the midst of the pain, because I've had this experience where being present with what is, even if it's hard, there's this joy in it. At the same time, if you watch it, it's like alive. So,
Thank you, Christina, for just wanted to bring up this
yeah,
question.
beautiful.
Thank you so much, Herbert. Lovely to meet you here. And I'll just quickly want to slip in a question from the chat, if you could be very essential about the answer. That there's a few people, Bettina is bringing the question of more of an explanation of what we saw on the 2 brain scans, the traumatized brain scan.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another question, can it be that somebody has so much brain damage of childhood trauma that it's impossible to heal?
Yeah.
So I think there is something where those brain scans are really interesting, but also a bit frightening for people.
Yeah.
So I'd
So
love to hear.
to
Yeah.
be
And
succinct,
then
but
we want to
also,
hear from you, Vanessa.
yeah. So I'm going to be succinct, like you said, but there's more. There's so much to say about this question. So that was looking at a child with maltreatment and a child without, looking at normal brain development under nurturance and brain development without it. And what we know is neuroplasticity is constantly happening. And when we have inflammation in the brain, which is caused by stress and body inflammation and all those things, certain cells get turned on and they start chomping away at our neurons. It's a little bit like the white blood cell in the body that gets activated when you get sick and it goes after things. There's something called the microglial cell in the brain that does the same thing. It's usually very happy and makes everything happy, but when you get toxic stress and trauma, it actually eats away at your brain. Okay, so that's really scary. But brain plasticity is our friend and something that's possible. The practices that Thomas teaches are the practices that promote brain plasticity, but there's brain retraining where we can become like the internal family systems work is very powerful, where you get related, try to develop this adult main personality where you're the loving adult to all the parts and building that capacity so that you can start to retrain body responses and repeating trauma by continuing to stay in trauma and all of that is what's possible. So there's a whole set of kind of sequenced activities that can lead to healing. And many children who had very bad trauma thrive because they had the nurturance and the opportunity to heal. So yes, we can heal. And sometimes what happened is so hard that it will impact you. And this is a big question. I haven't shared a huge amount about my own experience, but I had quite a bit of trauma in even when I was in the womb and after, and I have some health issues that I have to accept, and maybe they'll always be there. So yes, it is important to prevent. It is important, and sometimes we are walking around with damage, but that doesn't mean we can't leverage it and do our best. It's the self-compassion we need to have, I think, in that. So, but there's lots of opportunities for healing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Christina. And over to you, Vanessa.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a good point to add what I wanted to I just wanted to add something to the point that probably Christina said, that it's good yourself to tell the others what you need to feel safe in a situation.
Right.
And my experience was last weeks, like quite an actual personal experience with my PTSD, that it was overwhelming in an online group to be asked from the host what I need in my group to feel safe. So she was quite aware of that there are several levels, and so she said, like, what do you need from yourself? What do you need from the others? And what do you need from me as the host person? And still, I was completely overwhelmed by this, which I realized 3 days later. Like, I realized myself, oh, I was completely not able to answer these questions because my system is not able to feel safe with others at all. And then I asked my therapist if that might be the solution for why I was in the
Yeah.
chaos with this. And she said, yeah, that's possible, that you really
Yeah.
can't. And then someone sticking into the wound of, where's the safety?
No,
There
you're
is
really right.
none.
But you
Can be
notice,
overwhelming. So I just wanted to add, like, if there is a person, it might be you or the other person you are talking to, like having that in mind, that it is possible that the person is not able to feel safe to feel safe right now. That doesn't have to do with the other person or the other persons. And realizing this made me feel so much more secure and safe within myself, because I understood what was going on, that now, for the first time in years, I can imagine being in groups without blaming the others and without suffering from feeling so alone because they don't understand and stuff. So just adding this point of asking yourself what you need to be safe can or might be answered in some cases with, it's not possible right now. And then for me, that was very, very helpful. So
yeah,
yeah,
I
just
mean,
wanted to ask what you say to that.
I'm so happy that you brought that up. What I noticed Thomas doing is energetically sensing where a person is and meeting them slowly without any, you know, sense of it's my job to make you feel safe. It's sort of being with whatever that is for another. But there's also, and I really relate to what you're saying, because for me, if I could figure out what I needed and ask for it, I probably would. But when you have neglect, in particular, neglect is a certain kind of trauma where you are neglected. And so being asked what you need when you should have had somebody give you what you needed you can't ask for what you need when you're a baby. And so it can be very triggering to have somebody say, what do you need? Because it can trigger, for me, anyway, that super early life sense of, you're supposed to know what I need. You're supposed to give it to me, just give me what I need, which is, I don't know. It's your job, right? And so when you have really early life neglect, where your needs are not met, your healthy needs are not met, it can create like a stupefaction where you freeze around feeling your own needs, because you're not supposed to think about that when you're little. You're supposed to have somebody come. And so it can be very much a part of healing to allow that awareness that I don't know what I need, and I have a lot of energy around that. So you're bringing up something very deep and subtle, and it's why we want to keep learning, right? As if we're practitioners, we need to keep learning about that. Thank you, Vanessa, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and beautiful how you were able to show up here, Vanessa, this group. Thank you. We're going to have to complete here, so the time is there. And I feel like just this last conversation between you and Vanessa had so many directions
Yeah.
in which it could have been deepened and expanded, and which would have been wonderful to explore more fully. I really feel, Christina, that somehow you are like medicine for our Pocket Project community right now, that you bring specific knowledge, medicine approaches that this community is really hungry and ripe for. So I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to be inviting you again. And just want to bring a huge thank you to you for the generosity with which you shared with us today, and also the vulnerability and openness with which you were here so that we could celebrate our grief
Yeah.
in community or honor our grief in community.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's first of all, my true intention to be of service in whatever way I can. So yes, I will come back. And also I am very supported by being here with you all today and knowing that we're not alone and holding space for whatever is to emerge in this continued
Yeah, beautiful. And I just want to
American
mention,
experiment of some kind.
yeah, thank you, Christina, for
Thank you,
your
Kosho.
richness of sharing.
Thank you. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, we can just all go back to gallery view for a moment.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Here
And
we
thank
are in
you
this time together, right? We are in this now together.
yeah, and thank you to Melanie, to Hannah, and to Tatiana
Mhm.
for your
Thank you.
rich translation. Thank you.